Award-winning writer, sociologist, and geopolitical analyst from Canada, Mr. Mehdi Dariush Nazemroaya, welcome to The Inside. Well, sir, according to a recent American intelligence report published in the American International Periodical, which specializes in defense and intelligence affairs, it says that the U.S. administration cannot save Egyptian President Morsi any longer from falling, and that his fall is just very imminent. Not just his fall, the fall of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt is just imminent. What's your take on this?
Well, I think the way we have to pose this question is, has the United States, and specifically by that I mean the Obama administration, has it been trying to save Morsi and the Akhwan government there? I don't think that they've been trying to save them. I think that they've been letting them take Egypt into a free fall. And they want Egypt in a coma. The U.S. administration there played the Muslim Brotherhood government against the Egyptian military. They have a plan B. If Morsi collapses, this just makes Egypt a much more chaotic place, and it keeps it in a coma. We're talking about the most populous, largest Arab state, the natural leader of the Arab countries. Under Gamal Abdel Nasser's presidency, Egypt was the country that used to stand up to the West.
Is it still the natural leader?
No, it's not. Since Sadat, Egypt has been kept in a coma. It's always been looking internally. After that, Mubarak continued Sadat's policies, and this has always shielded Israel, of course. And the Muslim Brotherhood has just continued the policy. The Muslim Brotherhood has continued what Sadat and Mubarak have done. They've continued to keep Egypt in a coma, and they've continued to protect Israel.
You know, since the fall of Mubarak, chaos has never stopped in Egypt. Rather, it exacerbated. What do you say on this?
I think this is exactly what the United States and its allies like Israel want in Egypt. I mean, they want Arab countries and this region to be filled with weak governments that are internally divided. They're too busy all looking inward to look outward, or to have assertive foreign policies and independent foreign policies. But
even inward, it's total destruction and devastation and chaos inside Egypt. I mean, look what's happening nowadays in Egypt.
But this is exactly what the United States prefers. They want Egypt to look inward. They don't want it to be absolute chaos. They want enough chaos for the country to always be kept busy and preoccupied with internal matters.
We're going to discuss more the internal matters and the external matters when it comes to Egypt and its neighbors and its milieu, actually. But here I want to go back to this intelligence report, because they are mentioning and they are saying and they are indicating that some kind of events are going to take place that are going to be so important at the end of this year in Egypt. And it says that the Egyptian military is ready to important events that will take place in Egypt near the end of this year, different from the events that occurred at the beginning of the revolution, where the Muslim Brotherhood got help from Hamas in Gaza to stand in face of the Egyptian military.
All right. Well,
what do you think might happen at the end of this year?
I think that the military you could see a military junta in Cairo. You can see the military take control. Actually, let me rephrase that. We can see the military take back control. What we've had in Egypt all these years has been military governments. Even Mubarak, Sadat, they've all been military governments. They've been wearing, of course, suits and ties like civilians, but it's always been generals in charge of that country and its businesses. And we're just going to see the military take back control of that country. And of course, the United States prefers the military take control, because the military has always guaranteed Israel's security. It's always guaranteed U.S. supremacy in Egypt. And it's always guaranteed that the Suez Canal would be basically under U.S. control in one way or another. So they want the military to take back power. And of course, I want to emphasize this. The Egyptian military, above all things, is an internal police force. It's not there to defend Egypt's sovereignty against outside players. It's there to police the Egyptian people. And this is why the United States has given Egypt the second most military aid after Israel. It's to keep the Egyptian military policing the Egyptian people and to keep Egypt from rising out of its coma, from waking up, from getting an independent foreign policy, and from breaking its peace accord with Israel.
What problems of the West with Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood? Because as far as we know that Egyptian President Morsi is in good terms with the Americans.
Well, Mubarak was on good terms with the Americans. They let him go. Muammar Gaddafi was on good terms with the Americans. They let him go. It doesn't matter if you're on good terms with them. You're disposable. You get used, and once they're done using you, they just replace you with somebody else. That's the name of the game. That's the name of it's called American foreign policy.
Right.
There's no allies that they'll hold on to.
There's no permanent friends or permanent foes when it comes to foreign policy.
There's no permanent friends or permanent foes, but there's always permanent interests.
Yeah, common interest. Now, according to an article titled "Morsi Digs Himself into a Hole," published in the Arab daily Al-Sharq Al-Awsat, Abdurrahman al-Rashid said about Morsi's government, quote, "Their rivals are increasing. First there were the leftists and the revolution's youths, now military men, Salafists, Copts, media figures, intellectuals, the dollar, the stock market, and unemployment have joined them, and more to come, of course. If all these come together, they will be capable of burying President Morsi's government, not just toppling it," unquote.
Well, I think we're, like you said at the beginning of this interview, I think the Muslim Brotherhood is very close to collapsing in Egypt. In fact, I want to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood in far broader terms.
Go ahead,
we're
please.
seeing their decline in the region. People in Libya are not happy with the Muslim Brotherhood there. And I think in Syria, well, we can see in Syria what's happening is Muslim Brotherhood's so-called revolution is in retreat. So their time is about to fade.
It's more of a takfiri revolution in Syria, not just a Muslim Brotherhood.
Sure, the Takfiris are doing the fighting,
Yeah,
but politically it is the Muslim Brotherhood that's supporting them. The Syrian National Council coalition in Istanbul is the Muslim Brotherhood. It's the basis of it.
Also in Turkey, the same.
In Turkey, we can see Erdogan's AKP party, which is basically Muslim Brotherhood too, is now they're in decline. I don't know if the alternative to them will be better with the Republicans, but we can see all across the region that people are unhappy with the Muslim Brotherhood, and there is a decline. I don't think that President Morsi can hold on, but yet again, I want to mention that Egypt, the United States desires to see Egypt in a coma where it's always looking internally, and this is not just Egypt. This is what the United States likes to see generally for most of the countries in this region and other parts of the world as well.
You're talking here about the military, but how do you see President Morsi's approach to the Palestinian cause?
Well, he's been an absolute hypocrite. I mean, any honest person who's watched President Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters, whether they're in Doha, like Sheikh Kardawi, knows that they've been hypocrites about the Palestinian issue. When Gaza was being bombed, most of those people who were saying we need to help our Arab brothers in Syria, we need to go in, we need to send them weapons, it's our duty. In fact, the Saudi foreign minister said it's our duty to help our brothers in Syria. Yet their duty all of a sudden stops when the Palestinians fight for their rights legitimately. We're talking about mostly civilians being bombed. We're not talking about people with guns all the time.
Now, Mahdi, as an observer with in-depth knowledge of the Middle East and North Africa, do we see, or can we say to a certain extent, that what took place in Egypt so far, can we consider it as a revolution?
No, not at all. I mean, a revolution has to be completed with changes. There has to be political, economic, social changes. We haven't seen any of that in Egypt. What I can say is that the Egyptian people, Egyptian society, they're less afraid than ever before. They're more outspoken, and their mindsets have become revolutionary. They're ready to stand up to whatever government, whether it's a Muslim Brotherhood government or a military junta. They're willing to stand up to them. So their mindset has changed. But if you're talking about politics, let's examine the Egyptian state. Have they ended their international agreements and peace treaty with Israel. Camp David Accord is still there.
No.
In fact, the Muslim Brotherhood was very sneaky about it. Before they were elected, they said, we are going to honor and respect all our international treaties. What do they mean by this? They wanted to say we're going to keep our treaty with Israel, but they didn't want to say in a way that offends and angers the Egyptian people. But it's more than just Israel. If we look at the entire military establishment, we look at the foreign ministry, and we look at a lot of the intelligence, which is deeply tied to the Israelis and the Americans, nothing was changed. In fact, a lot of the cabinet ministers, who are a lot of cabinet ministers Morsi has? Are they Muslim Brotherhood cabinet ministers, or are they people from the old regime? Who's the Egyptian foreign minister? Are these not people that are tied to the old regime? I mean, there are some Muslim Brotherhood figures. The Prime Minister and Morsi are there, and the Prime Minister was a civil servant actually during Mubarak's time. He worked for the Egyptian government. So was this a real change, or was it cosmetic? Was it that they replaced Hosni Mubarak, the last pharaoh's face, with a new Muslim Brotherhood face? I mean, it's really cosmetic. Did the economic agreements that the Egyptian state have with outside countries change? No. In fact, under Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, there's more foreign control of the Egyptian economy than there was before.
Now, we're going to discuss more your assessment of President Morsi now after 1 year in office, and also, you know, this discrepancy that lies between the elite leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood and the grassroots supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. But we have to stop now for a short break.
You asked a very fundamentally important question, fundamentally not only for Egypt and this region, but for the entire world. Of course, this region is constantly looked down upon as an undemocratic place by countries in Western Europe or the United States. So I think discussing the nature of democracy is very important. What is the nature of democracy? It's not just voting. Voting is only a mechanism. It's not the actual democracy. Democracy is the participation of citizens in decision making. That's what it means. In the United States, North America, Western Europe, citizens are voting, but the votes are not, they don't have a say through those votes. And it's the same thing in Egypt. People went to vote. In fact, it was actually a very low turnout for the referendum that happened in December 2012.
But officially they said no, they had a very big percentage of people who took part in the voting, and they voted pro the Constitution.
No, that's not correct. That's playing with numbers. That's what politicians do.
What can you tell us about numbers, please?
Well, I can tell you about the numbers was that the turnout was very low. Yes, the approval rating was over 60% out of the people that showed up. How many people showed up? It was about 32%, a little over 32% of eligible voters. 32% of eligible voters showed up, and only about 20.9% voted yes. 20.9% of all of Egypt's eligible voters voted yes. So that means a little over 13% of the entire Egyptian population basically approved of this
Constitution.
Yes, the constitutional change. So 13%, a little over 13% approximately of the entire Egyptian population helped pass this. I don't think that's democratic. That basically means a little over 1 out of 10 people. So what about the rest of those 9 people out of the little less than 9? But
so what does that all imply, Mahdi?
That implies that Mr. Morsi, number one, they're playing with numbers, and they're playing with people's perception. But number two, it means that we had a constitutional amendment passed in Egypt that basically in many other countries, because of the low turnout, would have been rejected. So Mr. Morsi basically gave himself more powers, even after he said he wouldn't do that. In fact, he played a very dirty game, because a lot of people protested when he gave himself more powers. And he said, okay, I'm not going to do it. Well, and he quickly pushed this referendum without letting people organize. A lot of people weren't able to go to the polls, and he basically gave himself more powers and made
more
himself
prerogatives. Yes.
He basically became a new Mubarak.
What's your assessment of Morsi now after 1 year in office?
I don't think the man's done much. I think he's just making Egypt a weaker
I mean, he
place.
came with lots of promises. What did he achieve?
He hasn't achieved anything. He's just made Egypt's situation worse. I want to point a few things out. What's happening right now in Ethiopia is they're going to build a dam that's going to block
The
the
Nahda
Nile.
Dam project, yes.
This is going to hurt Egypt. Morsi says it's fine. In fact, the experts he brought to talk about it, most people that are very well informed about
No,
this.
actually, he didn't say that it's fine, you know, because the Ugandan president, he said that, well, Egypt cannot keep on hurting all Africa with its interests. You know, Egypt must think also about the interests of all Africa. So Morsi is trying also, you know, to provoke the Egyptians against their African neighbors.
Well,
To entangle them more and more problems with their neighbors also. Not just against Syria, but also, you know, he's cutting and severing ties with the Syrians, and now he wants to make problems with the neighboring countries in Africa concerning the Nile Basin issue and the dam of Ethiopia, and, you know, all these, in addition to the internal matters when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the people who are demonstrating for freedoms, for promises, for all these issues.
well, I'm going to cover two things now because you brought Syria into the picture.
Yeah.
But
I mean, these all come in a one basket
of course,
together when it comes to Egypt.
the man's weakening Egypt. But Syria, I think that when he cut relations with Syria, in the first place, I think he only kept relations with Syria as a form of blackmail. He kept those relations to get more money from his paymasters in the Gulf. It was basically, he kept the door open. He didn't make the same mistake that the Turks did by cutting ties. He kept it open so he could basically get more money out of the Qataris and the Saudis over Syria. But one very important thing I want to emphasize is that he's cut his ties with Syria because the Gulf has pushed him. And why has the Gulf countries pushed him to do this? Because they're failing in Syria. His response to cutting ties is a response to the success of the Syrians in fighting the Takfiris. The retreat of the Takfiris is the reason why he's cut his ties with the Syrians. It's basically a response, and it shows that the project against Syria is failing. Now, jumping to Africa and Ethiopia, the man hasn't stood up for Egypt's interests at all. If the Nile is closed, this is their bread basket, farming, the economy, not just tourism. I mean, this is going to really hurt Egypt, and he's basically letting it go. He is creating problems with the rest of Egypt's
Africa.
neighbors,
Yes.
not just in Africa. I mean, broader neighbors, you know.
The surrounding neighbors.
Sure,
yes,
he's
yes.
creating, like his statements about Hezbollah, for example. The man is creating problems. He's basically because his policies are very bad now, he's distracting Egyptians also with these statements. These statements, it's a means of distracting them from the internal problems. But at the same time, what does it say when this man, because of the Gulf countries, doesn't want to restore relationships with Iran? Is it bad to have relationships with Iran? What does that say? Like, for some reason, it's wrong to have relationships with Iran. I mean, there's something, we have to pause and think. Why would they not want relationships with Iran? And why would he actually appease them in this?
Allow me here to comment on something. Deputy Supreme Guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, Rashad al-Bayoumi, in an interview with Al-Monitor, stressed that under President Morsi, Egypt will not turn its back on the United States. However, at the same time, it wants to deal with the United States based on a mutual relationship, far removed from the policy of leadership and subordinate that prevailed under the previous regime. Yet, the Brotherhood long and bitterly criticized Egypt's secular leaders, including the former President Hosni Mubarak, for acting as American lackeys by shunning Iran. They criticized Mubarak before coming to power. They came to power and they started, as we said, that they started this act of flirting with the Iranians. but nothing came back as they talked about before.
It's the same with Israel, though. They
They
always
were-
said
yeah,
we're
they
going to
were-
get rid of the peace
You
treaty,
know,
and look
but
what they...
they were in a position of opposition. This is what I'm going to ask you about is, you know, this kind of difference or this kind of discrepancy or this kind of hiatus between the Muslim Brotherhood leadership and their grassroots supporters, you know, because the Israeli flag is still waving in Cairo and the Camp David Accords remained untouched. You know, what does this kind of action, you know, create in the grassroots, those who were always in a position of opposition of Israel?
Well, first of all, many of the people in the grassroots are very good people. We can't, when we criticize the Muslim Brotherhood, we have to be very clear and frank. We're criticizing their leadership. We're not criticizing all those good people who put their sweat and blood into putting them in power. Those are really good, many of them are very decent people. Even if you don't ideologically agree with them, they had good intentions in their support for the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, in regards to the Muslim Brotherhood's policies, there is a divide in the Brotherhood. It's not a homogeneous body at all. There's a lot of internal conflicts now, and there's a lot of people in the grassroots that are upset. I mean, there's a conflict within the Brotherhood, and it's not only at the level of the grassroots, even at the leadership level, but at the grassroots, there's a lot of people that are questioning, is this the revolution I want?
Even the economic policies of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
Well, the economic policies of the Muslim Brotherhood have not been Muslim at all. I mean, let's be very clear and frank. When it comes to people when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood and when it comes to their supporters, like Sheikh Qardawi, nothing about their economics is Islamic at all. There's nothing. Is Egypt still dealing with the IMF, where there's a system of interest which is against the Quran? Yes, of course. So I don't understand how a party that says they're fundamentally following the Quran and on the basis of Islam continues an economic policy like this. They never say anything actually about it. Very little about economics. What they talk about is the superficial things, the controversial things, the things that will make the average person, take the average person's attention away from the basis. What is the basis of livelihood in Egypt and all other places? It's the economics. And when it comes to economics, these countries are still colonies, and the Muslim Brotherhood has helped keep them colonies.
What do you expect for Egypt in the coming days? Quickly, if I may ask.
It's very volatile. I mean, Morsi's unpopular, and he's just going to continue being more and more unpopular. Maybe he'll call in the military again. Maybe the military will take over. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in Egypt, but the Egyptian people don't want this man in power anymore.
Right. Award-winning author, sociologist, and geopolitical analyst from Canada, Mahdi Dariush Nazemroaya. Many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome, sir. إذن